We are live with the Week 16 IDP Blitz. Is it Germaine Pratt's time to shine? That and more this week. John Norton, is it Germaine Pratt's time to shine in our IDP lineups in Week 16?
Absolutely it is. We've been talking about this guy for the last couple of weeks. I've been writing about him in my column. Ever since Logan Wilson's been down, he has been the 3-down linebacker for the Bengals, and his numbers have reflected that. He has 16 solo tackles, 17 assists, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, half a sack, and a pass defended in 3 starts. He was nine solos, 6 assists, and half a sack last week, and he has a great matchup with Baltimore this week. Since week 9, Baltimore's opponents, the inside linebacker groups have averaged 10.6 solo tackles, 5.6 assists, and almost half a sack with this matchup. So you have to keep an eye, make sure Logan Wilson's not back this week. He's inching closer. They didn't put him on IR because they expected that he might be back in time quicker than what the 3 weeks that he would have had to miss being on IR. This is the 3rd week. But so far, I've seen nothing to suggest that he's going to play this week, so Pratt should get to start here. And even if Wilson does get to start, Pratt should still put up pretty decent numbers as that, the linebacker that may not be on the field in all situations, but he'll still get plenty of playing time with this matchup to put up good numbers.
Let's talk about lineups, because Germaine Pratt isn't exactly somebody that you expected to count on with a berth in the fantasy championship on the line. And in general, there's been a lot of chaos this year. Usually, Cecil calls it the Marcy Rossman rule because he went to a dance with Marcy Rossman and then left with somebody, dance with somebody else, dance with who brung you. But some of these guys, John, they haven't brung us. On the way to the dance, the car broke down. We had a hitchhike to the dance. So we might be dancing with some different names. What overall advice can you give folks as they're ready to set their lineups here for Week 16?
Yeah, normally we talk about this every year, and this question comes up, and I always say the same thing. I'd like to tend to lean on the guys that I know got me there. Those are the guys that I know I can count on. But this year, it's been such an upheaval every week with COVID, with injuries, with everything else. You almost have to start to look at some of these guys that you can exploit on a week-to-week basis, matchup-based basis, and so forth, because these guys are going to put up good numbers if you hit it right, and you're going to have a lot of guys that aren't going to be playing that maybe you counted on to get you there to begin with. So I think we have to rethink how we approach that a little bit this year and be more open to playing the Germaine Pratts and the guys that maybe haven't been there for us all year but have come on in the last couple of weeks or are getting opportunity in good situations because of COVID and injuries and so forth. You strike it rich on some of these guys. You might miss on a few of them, but there seems to have been a lot more opportunity this year and a lot more being able to pick right when you're doing these streams and picking guys on, especially at the corner positions and so forth. Just have an open mind. If the guy's got a terrible matchup and maybe he's been a little inconsistent, you might as well roll with somebody that's got a great matchup that you think is going to be hot this week.
Well, speaking of corners, let's talk about a few other matchups. Like you said, matchups can sometimes lead the way. Let's talk about a few matchups that may help us when you do have to pick your cornerbacks this week. There's the Baltimore-Cincinnati matchup. Now, Baltimore's corners are there's a whole side to that. They're a bunch of backups, and that's why you want to play your Cincinnati wide receivers and Joe Burrow. But what about the Cincinnati corners against whether it's Lamar Jackson or Tyler Huntley? Probably somebody's got to be taking a lot of shots and maybe bringing their team back from behind.
Yeah, when you think of the Ravens, you think of a running team. You think of a quarterback that doesn't throw necessarily a lot, and you kind of dismiss looking at the corner position against those guys. But if you really sit down and crunch the numbers and look at it, Baltimore's been a pretty outstanding matchup for the corner position pretty much all year long. Since week 9, the opponent's corner groups have averaged 16 tackles and 2.5 assists and over half a turnover against Baltimore. Bengals corners have been rather productive this year. You got Trey Wayne stepped in for Chidobe Awuzie last week. Awuzie was out with COVID. He's also battling a bit of a sore foot, so it's hard to say if he would have played even if he weren't on the COVID list. But I think whoever gets in the starting lineup this week, if Awuzie is back, plug him in. If he's not back, Trey Waynes is going to be in that starting spot, and I think he's going to have plenty of opportunity. a little bit in run support and a whole lot in the passing game as well. I think even with Huntley in there, it might even be better.
Let's stay with another either or, maybe both situation with the Houston Texans corners going up against Justin Herbert.
The Chargers have been, next to the Ravens, probably the best matchup for corners so far this year. Desmond King and Terrence Mitchell have both put up pretty good numbers on a semi-consistent basis as corners go. Corner is typically an inconsistent situation anyway because game plans affect their production so much at times. Both of these guys have put up some good quality numbers. They're both very capable, outstanding matchup for corners. And they're probably both guys that are going to be available on your waiver wire. So there's a lot of defensive backs, especially at the corner position, out with COVID this week. So if you've lost somebody, these are a couple guys that you can look up and plug in. And I think they have a high floor and a high ceiling. So you be a good gamble for you.
Yeah, Desmond King he's a player that always seems like he's deserved a more stable job and a starting job as he jumps from place to place.
He's healthy anyway.
Right. Let's talk about a few pass rushers maybe that you might want to look at if you're plugging someone in this week. First, let's start with Akiem Hicks. We talk about fresh legs for running backs this time of year, and there sure are a lot of backup running backs that are taking advantage of that. What about fresh legs for a pass rusher when we combine that with a matchup? What's the outlook for Hicks this week?
And we talked about the Cleveland Garrett a couple weeks ago when he came back and had a huge game. Akiem Hicks, first game back, been off for 6 weeks. Goes in 4 tackles and assists and a couple of sacks. Fresh legs make a difference pretty much anywhere at this point in the season. Pass rushers, running backs, even wide receivers get a little extra burst from it. Matchup wise, Chicago is playing Seattle this week. Seattle tends to give up a good number of sacks. I think they've allowed 2.7 sacks per game on average since week 9. Good matchup, fresh legs. You've got a player that has the potential to be dominant on any given week. Now, he put up the big numbers last week, but if you watch the game, he even made more of an impact on the field than the numbers would suggest. So, second game back, he's still fresh. I like Akiem Hicks this week as an odd starter that most people aren't going to be looking at or considering. Somebody you can sneak in there if you need to pick somebody off waivers. Chances are he's out there.
Look ahead to next year. I know we're talking about playoff lineups, but also there are some teams like mine in Red Eye Masters getting drummed even out of the toilet bowl bracket. I was alive for a second there last night as the Tuesday night games were unfolding. Teams that are maybe putting someone on their bench to carry over to next year. I know the Texans didn't have a lot of capital in this year's draft, but on the third day, they really made a point to get Garrett Wallow. How's the first year gone? Is there potential reward if you stash him on your bench next year?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of us that are in that situation where we're looking towards next year in dynasty formats and so forth. So if you happen to be stuck in that situation, or even if you're still in the playoffs and you can pick up guys that you can hang on to, Garrett Wallow is somebody I talked about from the preseason on. Kind of been watching him all year. He hasn't really gotten a whole lot of opportunities, played in a couple games, and the 2 games that he has played in, he's looked pretty good. He subbed for Christian Kirksey this last week. 6 tackles, 5 assists, and a sack against Jacksonville. Putting up those kind of tackle numbers against Jacksonville is a feat in its own with that offense. But looking a little bit deeper, Wallow, he a pretty solid player. He was a 5th-round pick. He's on a team that is going to be looking to basically rebuild from the ground up. Both Christian Kirksey and Camus Grugier-Hill are the starters. Both of those guys are set to be free agents at the end of this season. You mentioned they're a little strangled with draft picks and so forth still. So they're going to be looking to save some money to get some good, young, cheap players that they can get into their lineup. He's definitely not a sure thing, but we've had exposure of him, he's looked pretty good on the field. And I think he's one of those guys that has the potential to come in next year and surprise and win a starting job at the inside linebacker spot for him.
Another team that you may look at, another bottom dweller team, the New York Jets. We've talked a little bit about Quincy Williams. We can touch on Quinnen's little brother, but also Elijah Riley. And this has been a team that we've looked at the safety position. Marcus May was somebody that at different times seemed to be on the verge of an IDP breakout. Is there something there for the future with the little guy, Elijah Riley?
Marcus May was really in line to have a really good season this year. He was putting up real good numbers early in the year before he got injured. Moved him over to the strong safety position, and with that defense, he was set to do big things. Elijah Riley, there's been a couple guys in between there that they've tried. They've had several guys get injured, so they've had a chance to look at a lot of people. Riley's actually injured now, may or may not be able to get back on the field this week, but 4 or 5 games that we have seen from him, I've liked what I've seen on the field. He's been aggressive. He hits way bigger than he looks as far as being physical. Just very sharp on the field. He's put up good numbers for us. There's no sure thing that he's going to be back and have an opportunity to start next year, but Marcus May is one of the guys that's been talked about as somebody that may not return. He's at the end of his contract as well. The Jets are another team that's going to be in a full rebuild mode going into next year. And at the very least, I think Elijah Riley makes the team. Whether he actually gets an opportunity to run into the starting position is going to depend on how much capital they elect to spend there. They've got a lot of other holes to fill. If he's a guy that they think can get him by for a while, he might get that opportunity again next year. Definitely somebody that I would think about stashing on my roster for a dynasty format.
Another team that might be rebuilding next year, we're going to change gears and talk about production from week 15 and whether we should chase it. The Seattle Seahawks, we talked about the other side of this matchup with Chicago. Dunlap is going to play, Carlos Dunlap is going to be facing Justin Fields. He had some great production for us on Tuesday night, but is that enough reason to plug him in with so much on the line in week 16?
Do not be an ambulance chaser. Nothing has changed with Carlos Dunlap other than he happened to have one big blow-up game. He played 21 snaps in this game, which has been about the average of what he's played on most weeks. He's done nothing up till now. I think this is what he's got, 4.5 sacks on the season, and he got 3 of them last week. Chicago, if you're desperate and in dire need of somebody at a position, I guess if you're looking for a flyer, you might throw him in there. But I do not have grand expectations that Carlos Dunlap's going to do anything here. And unfortunately, he's probably not going to do anything next year either, since he's still under contract, and Seattle's going to continue to rotate 53 guys into their defensive end position. Nobody's going to play more than 15, 20 snaps a game, hardly. Might be a little exaggeration there, but you get the idea. They just use way too many people. You never know from one week to the next which guys are going to put up the numbers, because there's just no consistency there. You need to take a major flyer. He's a good player. I just don't like the situation. The matchup's not particularly great. I think I would not get too excited about one big week.
Nothing to get excited about in the injury front, but and there are some places, some injuries where there might be a replacement player to pick up. And then there's another injury, a big injury, that it might not be about the replacement player to pick up, but another player in that defense that could get a boost. It's Landon Collins, who had a nice night going for Washington before hurting his hamstring. Who's the major beneficiary here, or potentially major beneficiary that we need to make sure is in our lineups for week 16?
So Landon Collins, most of you are aware, has been playing linebacker rather than safety. They're very thin at the safety position as well. Washington's pretty much thin across the board at this point between the COVID situation they're in. They've got a lot of guys hurt. So when Collins went down, most of the second half, we saw Jamin Davis, the linebacker, play virtually every snap in the second half. I think he's going to probably be the guy that gets the biggest boost out of that. I'm not sure who they're going to maybe insert to take a few snaps that Collins would have taken in some of the situations, some of their situational sub packages and so forth. But I think Davis is the guy that gets the extra boost there. He's a young guy, probably going to take over a full-time role next year, or at least as high as they drafted him. I'm sure they expect him to take over a full-time role next year and are counting on that. With this loss, they're pretty much on the outside looking in. I know they're not mathematically eliminated, but for all practical purposes, they're probably not going to make the playoffs. So I could definitely see Washington plugging this guy in and letting him get a full load of snaps for the last 3 games just to get him ready for next year.
for all practical purposes, you've come to the best place for IDP information. We coming at you every Wednesday afternoon. Next week is the last IDP Bits of the year with Matt Schauf. And, of course, if you're a subscriber to Footballguys, you get all the great work in Eyes of the Guru, 2 sets of projections, lots of other great IDP coverage to help take you all the way to the championship. Hope all of our loyal IDP nation has a great holiday and enjoys everything there is to enjoy, including almost every day now, it seems like. There's football. Of course, there's going to be a lot to pay attention to, even though we're building up to the holidays, time with our loved ones. We're going to be tracking everything at Footballguys, so we'll be watching everything so you don't have to. Sometimes, like Cecil says, you have a life, we don't. Well, that's not necessarily true, but we will be watching all this stuff for you folks to help get you through to the next round of the playoffs always. We want to do the best for you because you're so